The Dream and the Truth of Azealia Banks. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and once upon a time, just earlier this decade, I was a singer, songwriter, producer, and DJ who worked with dozens of people, some of whom being very talented and underappreciated, but others who were completely mediocre, delusional, and entitled. Now granted, the entitled and unprepared people didn't really last long alone with me in my bedroom, and I can assure you, I know at least 2 different people who I know for certain left my room in tears, and another that I am about 99% positive must have been sobbing by the time they were out of my building. Still, the experience of working with dozens of singers and rappers who often believed themselves to have the potential to become the next RuPaul, or in some cases, the next Bjork or Madonna, is something completely irreplaceable, as it really did teach me something about human nature, zooming in super close on the human heart and its hopes and dreams. However, these hopes and dreams are not at all pure, or even admirable in many cases, but one thing I can assure you of is that as a legitimately hardworking person in the music industry, you start to realize that there's almost no way any of these non-talented people might ever find their way into the international spotlight by some miraculous happening, because the music industry is just too rough of a business for non-talented wackos who don't work hard. But then, of course, we have people like Azealia Banks. Now, honestly, a lot of my younger audience members might not entirely remember why she is as famous as she is to begin with, and I assure you, it's about as minuscule of an artistic effort that anybody could possibly bring to the table, which might possibly turn anybody into an international sensation. Azealia Banks was featured as the rapper on a house track called 212, which is, truthfully, a pretty great dance track in my opinion, and it was released for free download in December of 2011, which was right when house music was really coming back into fashion in urban meccas and in indie music nerds' bedrooms. Now, of course, if you actually look on the credits for the hit single, it was made not by one other person, the way that many songs are, but 2 different producers who were some brothers from Belgium, which is not at all uncommon for well-produced dance tracks, in that a huge portion of the best singles we hear are actually written by Northern European people for Americans to sing or rap over. But of course, the single was released under her name, and there was a really fun video with her jumping around dancing, which was played at every club that had a video screen and VJs. And so, of course, being that it was 2011 and everybody was really starting to get used to fetishizing black culture due to it being the Obama era, people really wanted to love this new black girl, Azealia Banks, and clearly it went to her head, because she had no problem trash talking Iggy Azalea eventually.
At the same time, what happened? And you told me.
I said that there are people out there who believe that the source of this issue is that Iggy came later and straight up jacked the name from Azealia Banks. Because, I mean, the name Azealia Banks was already out and a thing when anyone first heard of Iggy Azalea. So there are those that believe that Iggy simply saw the name Azealia Banks, was like, I like that name, and
straight ran with it.
And that could be the source of original tension.
What's your perspective on it?
Okay, so here's the thing with Iggy Azalea. This is the thing. I feel just like in this country, whenever it comes to our things like black issues or black politics or black music or whatever, there's always this like undercurrent of kind of like a fuck you. There's always like a fuck y'all niggas, like y'all don't really own shit, like y'all don't have shit. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
And that Macklemore album wasn't better than the Drake record.
Now, in my head, due to how long it took for each of them to really become names in my sphere, I was thinking that this interview came fairly soon after they had each become popular. However, that interview happened about 3 years after each of them had already been releasing music, and in fact, Iggy Azalea was releasing music under that very stage name before Azealia Banks even released 212 in December of 2011. So, of course, anybody with any shred of human decency would have immediately clarified when asked about it in an interview 3 years later that no, Iggy Azalea did not steal the name from her. And that misunderstanding was just an odd music world coincidence. However, as you saw, instead, Azealia Banks just smugly smiled with duping delight and elaborated about how black people are stolen from artistically and continued to let audiences believe that, yeah, maybe there was some truth to the idea that the Australian rapper who came first was actually totally ripping off not just black people, but her personally. Apparently, Azealia Banks was the walking manifestation of the victims of 400 years of cultural appropriation, or something. Now, looking back on all of this, it's easy to look at the veritable Harlem-born, Valley Girl acting, fake-ass, crazy person, and not be surprised that she was all but straight up lying about Iggy Azalea, but the fact of the matter is this. I believed her at the time without really investigating. Because, well, I was being positively racist in favor of black people. Due to the fact that, truthfully,
I was rooting for you! We were all rooting for you! How dare you!
Seriously, what you legitimately need to keep in mind about the way that the dramatic majority of all people thought, including gay white men that were about the age of 30 years old at the time, like myself, was that we were all deeply racist in 2011. I mean that we sincerely did everything we could to love black artists and musicians, even if they maybe didn't deserve it, because we were racist towards basically everybody who wasn't black. I don't know. There's no great way of talking about the racism of the pop cultural zeitgeist that inspired us to emotionally penalize every media persona who wasn't black. Aside from saying that it was a feeling in the collective consciousness that corresponded very firmly with the dream that Obama was a great president that we were proud to have elected. And of course, Azealia Banks tapped right into that, as if she knew perfectly well that she was taking all of us for a ride. But really, as we all should know now, her hustle was somewhat short-lived in terms of tricking audiences into thinking that she was some sort of amazingly talented artist that was being taken advantage of by others, as opposed to being the dead weight that was taking seemingly everybody around her for a ride. Thus, it wasn't long before I kept hearing social media talk from friends in cities like New York, in which they'd complain that she would keep audiences waiting at super crowded club venues for very long periods of time, probably well over an hour, only to do 1 or 2 songs unenthusiastically. This attitude got so bad that she apparently canceled a show entirely at a music festival in Norway when only a handful of people were at her stage when she was scheduled to perform, which is a really bad thing to do in the music industry because the majority of money that musicians make these days isn't just from touring, but after getting booked at summertime festivals with huge lineups. And still, well, why was Azealia Banks famous again? Was it really because of the hit single 212, which legitimately was the only musical contribution she's ever delivered that anybody sincerely loved, despite what some people might pretend to feel about her newer work? Or was it just the fact that her tweets and various fiascos were entertaining and rather like watching reality television with the target audience being intersectional feminists.
It was a hot mess, but Sky gathered her. She read her down with some of the nastiest shade that I've read in a minute. When she said that her memes were more relevant than her music, oh, I gagged. Because objectively it's true, and the best reads are true.
Personally, looking back on all of it, I'm starting to see Azealia Banks as an even less hardworking and less talented Courtney Love, in that she didn't even have a dead genius ex-husband, couldn't even play guitar, didn't write 1 or 2 songs solo, and probably wouldn't be a compelling co-star in a feature-length Hollywood movie where she'd play the wife of some insane celebrity from the 70s or whatever. And then, of course, she even started getting increasingly volatile to the point where even far leftists began being uncomfortable about her celebrity right around the time that she called a homosexual-seeming flight attendant a word that starts with F and rhymes with maggot. Of course, similar to the way that nobody was offended about Azealia Banks being totally racist against white people, to the point where it was actually kind of amusing and maybe was even a marketing strategy that she realized was working in her favor. Similarly, when Azealia lashed out at the particular gay man on the flight, the leftist press didn't really turn on her. And I remember very clearly numerous people in my social sphere defending her right to say such things because, well, intersections. However, eventually she made one critical error in that she called Zayn Malik of the British boy band One Direction a number of racist names on Twitter, similarly accused him of copying somebody in some way or another, and thus, eventually, the few members of the press that still held a candle for her largely turned on her entirely, as everybody admitted that Banks is and was bad news from the beginning. You see, here's the thing you have to remember. Azealia Banks was not really talented. Instead, she was merely a crazy black woman. And I guess people like that, because it clearly helped her popularity immensely right in the middle of affirmative action Obama's presidency. However, Zayn Malik is British, but more importantly, his father is Pakistani. So although Banks just called him a slur or two and made fun of him for allegedly smelling like curry, she crossed a serious line which violated even her role in the progressive stack, in that one of the only rules black women cannot break is making fun of people from majority Muslim nations for their race and or religion. You see, of course, due to the pronounced 30-year history of Islamic governments making alliances with far leftists in the Western world, these far leftists, who control the dramatic majority of entertainment blogs, would never let some loudmouth black girl stand in the way of their cash flow. Because, of course, where does Al Jazeera, the Young Turks, and all of their media allies get their money from? If not, maybe directly from some of these governments. Clearly, black Americans are useful just so long as they are oppressed, but not as long as they piss off Islamists, and so, of course, that's why Banks was finally canceled. But if you're like most people, you probably never really liked her that much anyway.